The desert wind howled like a grieving mother as she knelt in the red dust, pressing her wedding ring into the earth above the third grave. Not to mark it, but to weigh down the truth so it wouldn't follow her back to town. She didn't cry. Not anymore. The last time her eyes had spilled salt water was over her brother's body, slumped against a water barrel with a bullet between his ribs, and his fingers still curled, like he was holding onto the last note of a song he'd never finish. That was 2 years ago. 2 dry seasons. 200 sleepless nights. Since then, the wind had scoured her cheeks raw. The sun had bleached the softness out of her skin, and the silence, that thick, suffocating silence between gunshots and coyote cries, had eaten up whatever part of her still believed in mercy. She called herself Mercy. A cruel joke, she knew. The town called her widow's curse. They whispered it behind swinging saloon doors, muttered it over poker hands, spat it like tobacco juice into the dust when she passed. She let them believe she was the omen. Let them blame the woman instead of the land. The desert didn't care who you loved. It only cared how long you lasted. And love, real, tender, foolish love, made you soft, made you slow, made you stop watching your back. She'd learned that the hard way. First with her father, shot in a land dispute over a patch of dirt too dry to grow sagebrush. Then her brother, caught between a sheriff's badge and a gambler's pride. Then her husband, sweet, stubborn Elias, who'd kissed her forehead the morning he rode out to negotiate peace with the cattle barons, and came back in a pine box with his boots still on and his wedding band missing from his finger. She found it later, glinting in the dirt outside the undertaker's, kicked there like a spent shell casing. She'd washed it, polished it, worn it on a leather cord around her neck until the day she buried Elias. Then she slipped it off, pressed it into the dirt above his grave, said nothing, just stood there until the sun dipped below the ridge and the shadows swallowed her whole. After that, she stopped wearing dresses, stopped braiding her hair, stopped saying good morning to the shopkeepers. She took work where she could, mending fences, scrubbing floors, skinning rabbits behind the butchers, anything that kept her hands busy and her heart quiet. She slept in the loft above the livery, paid in meal sacks and silence. She ate alone. I walked alone, breathed alone, and when a man looked at her too long, when his eyes lingered on the curve of her neck or the way her calloused fingers gripped a coffee tin, she'd meet his gaze steady and cold, and he'd look away. Every time, they all looked away, except the ones who didn't, the ones who smiled, the ones who brought her bread when her hands shook from hunger, the ones who said her name like it meant something. Those were the ones who ended up under the red dirt. 3 graves now, 3 names carved crooked into sun-bleached wood, 3 men who'd loved her, 3 men the desert had taken. And every night, when the wind picked up and the coyotes started their chorus, she'd sit on the edge of her cot, stare at her bare finger, and whisper the same confession to the dark. Every man I love must die. Not because she willed it, not because she cursed them, but because love in this land was a kind of surrender, and surrender got you killed. She didn't know why it happened, didn't know if God was punishing her, or if the devil had marked her, or if the desert itself had chosen her as its instrument. All she knew was the pattern, clear as boot prints in fresh mud. Tenderness led to tragedy. Affection led to ambush. A shared laugh at sunset led to a body cooling under the stars. So she stopped laughing, stopped touching, stopped letting anyone close enough to see the cracks in her armor. And still, the desert wasn't satisfied. It sent her signs. A raven perched on her windowsill every dawn. A child's shoe half buried near the well. A stranger riding in with eyes too kind, voice too gentle, hands too quick to offer help. She felt the storm gathering in her bones, felt the weight of the next death coming like a slow fever. And as she stood over the third grave, ring buried, hands empty, heart hollowed out like a gourd left too long in the sun, she made a promise to the wind. If he comes, I won't love him. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because love didn't ask permission. It didn't knock. It slipped in through the cracks, through a shared meal, a mended coat, a song hummed off-key at dusk. And when it came, the desert would be waiting, and so would the grave. The wind carried her whisper away, not to heaven, not to hell, but into the throat of the coming storm, where it would wait for the next man foolish enough to care. He was 16, maybe 17, too young to shave, too old to cry, and he rode into Redemption Creek singing a lullaby his mama taught him, voice cracking over the saddle's creak like a dry branch about to snap. His horse, a sway-backed mare with ribs like barrel staves, limped on 3 good legs and one that dragged through the dust like it was trying to write its own epitaph. His boots were split at the seams, stuffed with rags and hope. His hat was too big, his coat too thin, and his eyes, wide, brown, unbroken, held the kind of light that made mercy look away the moment he dismounted in front of the livery. He didn't ask for charity, didn't beg, just tipped his hat, cleared his throat, and said, "Ma'am, I can mend fences, chop wood, shoe horses. I ain't proud, just hungry." She stared at him, not at his words, not at his hands, at the way his voice trembled on Mama's lullaby, like he was still hearing it in his head, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. She should have turned him away, should have told him the bunkhouse was full, the work was gone, the town didn't take in strays. But the desert had a way of softening edges when you least expected it. A sudden breeze, a drop of dew on a cactus spine, a boy humming a tune that sounded like home. She nodded. The fence lines west of the creek. Tools in the shed. Sleep in the loft. Far corner. He grinned. Not a smirk. Not a leer. A real, sunburnt, tooth-missing grin that hit her like a backhand. She flinched. He didn't notice. Just whistled the lullaby again as he shuffled toward the shed, dragging his lame mare behind him. That night, she lay awake listening. Not to the coyotes. Not to the wind. To him. His soft breathing above her. His muttered words as he rearranged hay bales into something resembling a bed. His off-key humming. The same lullaby, drifting down through the floorboards like smoke. It curled around her ribs, settled in her lungs, made her chest ache in a way she hadn't felt since Elias kissed her goodbye. She hated it, hated him for it, hated herself more. By dawn, he'd already fixed 2 broken fence posts, stacked firewood knee-high, and left a tin of weak coffee steaming on her stool outside the livery door. She didn't thank him, didn't look at him, just drank the coffee, bitter, lukewarm, perfect, and walked away. He didn't follow, didn't push, just went back to work, singing louder now, like the desert itself was his choir. Days passed. He mended. He chopped. He swept. He smiled at Mrs. Calloway when she dropped biscuits by accident near his workbench. He helped Old Man Harker lift sacks of grain without being asked. He whistled while he worked, sang while he ate, laughed when the mare nuzzled his pocket for sugar. And every night, without fail, he hummed that lullaby as he climbed into the loft, soft, steady, stupidly sweet. Mercy stopped sleeping, started watching, from the window, from the alley, from the shadow of the water trough. She memorized the way his shoulders moved when he swung an axe, the way his lips shaped the words of that song, the way his eyes crinkled when he thought no one was looking. She told herself it was caution, vigilance, preparation, but the truth sat heavy in her gut like a stone. She was waiting for the desert to take him, waiting for the bullet, the fall, the fever, the betrayal. It always came, always. She started leaving things for him, a wool blanket on his hay pile, a heel of bread wrapped in cloth, a tin of salve for his blistered hands. Never a word, never a glance, just objects left like offerings at a shrine, quiet, desperate, doomed. He found them, used them, left wildflowers in return, tucked behind her door, tied to her water bucket. Once, pressed between the pages of the ledger she kept under her cot. She burned that one, burned it slowly, watching the petals blacken, curl, and vanish into ash. Told herself it was smart. Told herself it was survival. But when she closed her eyes that night, she saw his smile. I heard his song, felt the ghost of his fingers brushing hers when he handed her a canteen, just in case. And for the first time in years, she whispered a name into the dark, not a dead man's. "Hi, Jesse." Just once, just to test the weight of it. It felt like a death sentence. The next morning, she found him kneeling by the creek, washing his face, singing louder than ever. She stood behind him, silent, fists clenched, heart hammering like a trapped bird. He turned, saw her, smiled. "Mornin', Mercy." "Not ma'am, not miss." Mercy, like he knew her, like he owned her, like he was already stitching himself into the fabric of her ruin. She didn't answer, couldn't, just turned and walked back to town, boots heavy with dread. That afternoon, the sky bruised purple on the horizon. The wind picked up, howling through the canyon like a warning. Dust devils spiraled in the street. Shutters slammed. Dogs howled. And Jesse? He stood in the middle of it all, bareheaded, arms wide, laughing as the storm swallowed the sun. She watched from the livery window, fingers pressed to the glass, breath fogging the pain. The desert was coming, and it wasn't coming for the town. It was coming for him, for them, for the lullaby, for the smile, for the wildflowers, for the name she'd whispered like a prayer. She closed her eyes, prayed for the storm to take him quick, prayed for the bullet to be clean, prayed for the grave to be deep, because love in this land was a death sentence. And Jesse? He was already singing his way to the gallows. The lullaby faded into the wind, but the desert remembered every note and sharpened its teeth for the chorus. The shot cracked at high noon, not from her hand, but because of it, and the boy's lullaby died in his throat, replaced by the wet, ragged gasp of a lung filling with blood. He didn't scream, didn't curse, just crumpled sideways into the dust like a puppet with its strings cut, one hand still clutching the fence post he'd been mending, the other reaching, not for his gun, not for Mercy, but for the wildflower he'd tucked into his breast pocket that morning. Mercy saw it all, saw the puff of smoke curl from the ridge above the creek, saw the glint of a rifle barrel winking in the sun, saw Jesse's knees buckle, his eyes widened, his mouth open like he was still trying to finish the song. She didn't run, didn't scream, didn't even blink, her body locked in place, frozen like a statue carved from grief and gunpowder. The town didn't move either. Doors stayed shut, windows stayed dark, even the dogs went quiet. Only the flies came first, fat, black, buzzing, landing on his cheek before his body had even stopped twitching. She walked toward him, slow, deliberate, boots crunching over gravel, over brittle grass, over the last few bars of that damn lullaby, still ringing in her ears. She knelt beside him, didn't check for a pulse. I didn't need to. She knew the look, the glassiness in the eyes, the slackness in the jaw, the way the blood pooled too fast, too dark, too eager. She pressed her palm to his chest, felt the last beat stutter, weak, uneven, gone, and then she screamed. Not loud, not long, just one raw, rag sound ripped from the bottom of her soul, a sound that scared the buzzards off the rooftops and made the wind hold its breath. It wasn't grief. Not exactly. It was rage. Rage in the desert. Rage in the sky. Rage at herself for letting him smile, for letting him sing, for letting him tuck that flower into his coat like it meant something. Like he'd lived long enough to give it to her. The shooter didn't come down, didn't gloat, just vanished into the rocks like smoke. Coward or smart man. It didn't matter. Mercy knew who sent him. Knew the cattle baron's brand stamped on the bullet they'd find later. Knew the price of peace in this territory, paid in boys' blood and broken songs. She lifted Jesse's head into her lap, brushed the dust from his forehead, closed his eyes with her thumbs. His lips were still parted, still shaped around the last note he'd never finish. She leaned down, kissed his temple, whispered, "I'm sorry." Not for the bullet, not for the killer, for the love, for letting it in, for not stopping it, for not being strong enough to keep her heart locked tight. The townsfolk came then, slow, cautious, like they were afraid the curse might jump from his body to theirs. Mrs. Calloway brought a sheet. Old man Harker brought a shovel. The preacher brought silence. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. They wrapped Jesse in the sheet, carried him to the edge of the salt flats, dug the hole in record time. No service, no prayers, just dirt, shovel after shovel, until the mound was high and the wind had already started erasing his name from the air. Mercy stood at the edge of the grave, barefoot now, toes curling in the red dust. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just reached into her pocket and pulled out the wildflower, the one he'd meant to give her, crushed it between her fingers, let the petals fall into the grave. Then she turned. I walked back to town, past the shuttered windows, past the hushed whispers, past the saloon where men drank to forget and women prayed to be forgotten. She didn't stop at the livery, didn't climb to the loft, didn't touch the coffee tin he'd left warming on her stool that morning. She walked straight to the general store, bought a bottle of whiskey, a box of shells, a length of rope, paid in silence, carried them home like groceries. That night, she sat on her cot, bottle in one hand, revolver in the other, staring at the wall where Jesse had carved his initials, J.R., into the wood, right beside a crooked heart. She didn't drink the whiskey, didn't load the gun, just hold them, felt their weight, their promise, their failure. Outside, the wind picked up again. Coyotes howled. Somewhere, a train whistle cried in the distance. Lonely, lost, longing for a home it would never reach. She closed her eyes. I saw his smile. I heard his song, felt his fingers brushing hers. And for the first time since Elias died, she let herself remember what it felt like to be loved. Really loved. Not pitted, not feared. Loved. And that was the real tragedy. Not the bullet, not the grave, not even the curse. But I know, the knowing that love was worth dying for, and that she let him die because she was too afraid to live with it. She set the gun down, set the bottle down. I stood up. I walked to the window, looked out at the desert, vast, cruel, beautiful, and whispered, "Next time, I won't let go." But even as she said it, she knew the desert was listening, and it was already choosing the next man, the next song, the next grave, because love in this land was a death sentence. And she was the executioner who'd finally learned to weep. The coyotes fell silent, as if even they knew the next verse was already being written in blood. He arrived at dusk, collar crisp as a fresh grave, eyes colder than moonlit iron. And he didn't preach salvation, he preached reckoning, his voice slicing through the saloon doors like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. They called him Reverend Pike. Tall, gaunt, skin stretched tight over bone like old parchment, lips thin as a new snot. He didn't carry a Bible, carried a ledger, and in it, he'd written the names of the dead, her father, her brother, her husband, now Jesse, each one inked with the same damning flourish, by her hand, by her curse, by her sin. The town had been waiting for him, waiting for someone to name the plague, to point the finger, to turn their fear into fury and their whispers into a noose. They gathered in the square like vultures scenting meat, eyes hollow, hands twitching, boots scuffing the dust in restless circles. Mercy didn't run, didn't hide, just stood in the doorway of the livery, arms crossed, face blank, watching as Pike climbed onto the water trough and raised his ledger like a holy text. "This woman," he boomed, voice cracking like dry timber, "is not widow, not labor, not even human. She is a vessel of ruin, a bride of the devil, a blight upon this land." He flipped the page, pointed at Jesse's name. "You saw it," the boy sang. He smiled. He worked. And what did she give him? Agave. Cold. Alone. Unblessed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nods. Grunts. A woman spat. A man tightened his belt. Mercy didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Just stared at Pike's hands. Long fingers, clean nails, soft palms. Hands that had never buried a child, never scrubbed blood from floorboards, never held a dying boy while his song faded into silence. Hands that had only ever pointed, only ever condemned. Pike stepped down, walked toward her. Slow, smug, rope coiled over his shoulder like a serpent waiting to strike. "You will confess," he said, voice low now, meant for her ears alone. "You will name your sin, and then you will hang." She didn't answer, didn't move. Just let him come. Let him reach for her wrist. Let him wrap his soft, clean fingers around her scarred, sun-cracked skin. And then, quiet as a shadow, she spoke. "My sin." Her voice was sandpaper on stone. Dry, raw, real. My sin was loving them. My sin was letting them believe this world could be kind. My sin was not killing you first. The crowd gasped. Pike recoiled like she'd spat venom. She didn't stop. Couldn't. The words poured out now. Not shouted, not screamed, but spoken low, steady, lethal. You want names? I'll give you names. Elias Mercer, shot in the back while shaking hands. Tommy Reeves, drowned in 3 feet of creek water after his horse spooked by the shot you paid to scare him. Jesse Rourke, 16 years old, sang his mama's lullaby every night. You sent the bullet. I sent the love. Which one of us is the monster? Pike's face drained of color. The crowd shifted. Some looked away. Some gripped their hats. Some loosened their collars. She stepped forward. One step, then another, until she stood nose to nose with the preacher, close enough to smell the sweat under his collar, the fear under his breath. You want a confession? She whispered. Here it is. I love them. Everyone. And I'd do it again. Even knowing how it ends. Even knowing you'd twist it into sin. Even knowing the desert would take them. Love is the only thing this land can't kill. Until you people bury it. She turned. Faced the crowd. So go ahead. Hang me. Burn me. Call me witch. Call me curse. But when you lie down tonight, when you hear the wind howl and the coyotes cry, you'll hear their names. Not mine. Theirs. And you'll know you helped kill them too. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Suffocating. Then a single hand clapped. Old Man Harker. Then Mrs. Calloway. Then the blacksmith. Then half the town. Not cheers. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. Pike's face twisted. He yanked the rope from his shoulder. Enough, he roared. Seize her. 2 men stepped forward, nervous, sweating, gripping her arms like she might dissolve into smoke. They dragged her to the gallows tree, the same one where Elias swung, rope still frayed from his weight. They tied her wrists, looped the noose, adjusted the knot. Pike stood below, smug again, licking his lips like a man about to taste victory. Any last words, witch? She looked down at him, looked past him, looked at the desert stretching beyond the ridge, red, endless, waiting. And she smiled. Not a grin, not a sneer. A real, soft, broken smile. The kind Jessie used to give her. Just one, she said. And as the trapdoor creaked beneath her boots, she whispered it. Not to God. Not to the crowd. But to the wind. I'm not afraid. The drop came fast. The rope snapped taut. And for one terrible, beautiful second, silence. Then the wind rose. Not a breeze. A roar. A howl. A storm tearing in from the west, whipping dust into the air, snatching hats from heads, slamming shutters, drowning out screams. The rope swayed. The crowd scattered. And Pike, he stumbled back, tripped over his own ledger, fell into the dirt like a puppet with broken strings. Mercy hung still, eyes closed, lips parted, smiling. The storm didn't save her. Didn't need to. It carried her last words. Not to heaven, not to hell, but into the ears of every man, woman, and child who'd ever loved and lost and dared to love again. The rope creaked in the wind, but the desert didn't mourn her. It remembered her and waited for the next soul brave enough to whisper her name. They buried her at the edge of the salt flats, where no grass grows and no birds sing. Just cracked earth and silence, so thick it chokes the breath from your lungs. And still, the desert refused to let her rest. The preacher left town that same night, ledger tucked under his arm like a shield, horse lathered and wild-eyed, glancing over his shoulder every mile like Mercy's shadow rode behind him. The townsfolk didn't hold a wake, didn't light candles, didn't even mark her grave with wood or stone. Just shoveled the dirt, muttered a half-prayer, and walked away. Quick, quiet, guilty. But guilt doesn't bury truth. And truth in the desert doesn't stay buried. Within a week, the story started. Whispers at first, then warnings, then prayers. Travelers spoke of a woman's voice humming at dusk. Low, cracked, tender, drifting across the flats like smoke from a dying fire. Some swore they woke in the night to find their canteens full, their wounds wrapped in clean cloth, their horses calm and watered though no soul had stirred. Others told darker tales, of waking to find a fresh grave dug beside their campfire, shallow and waiting, as if someone knew they wouldn't last till dawn. The Apache scouts called her She Who Sings the Dying Home. Said she walked between worlds now, not damned, not saved, just waiting. For the next man foolish enough to smile at her. For the next soul brave enough to need her. For the next heart cracked open by loneliness, by hunger, by love. They say she doesn't appear to the strong, doesn't visit the proud, only the broken, the lost, the ones who've given up, curled in the dust, eyes closed, waiting for the coyotes to come. That's when she comes, barefoot, dust in her hair, wildflowers in her hands, and she sits beside them, doesn't speak, just hums. That lullaby, Jesse's lullaby, the one that sounds like home. And if they open their eyes, if they look at her, really look, they see her smile. Not the widow's smile, not the cursed woman's smile. Mercy's smile, the one she saved for Elias. For Jesse, for the men she loved enough to bury. And if they reach for her hand, she takes it, squeezes it, stays until their breathing slows, until their eyes close for the last time, until the desert claims them gentle, not cruel. Then she vanishes, back into the wind, back into the silence, back into the red dust, leaving only wildflowers on their chest and peace in their bones. The legend spread, from Redemption Creek to Silver Bend to the Rio Grande. Men stopped fearing her, started hoping for her. Dying men, anyway. The ones with bullets in their bellies or fever in their blood or ropes around their necks. They'd whisper her name like a prayer. Mercy, come sing me home. And sometimes she did. The preacher? They found him 3 months later, horse dead, canteen dry, body curled beneath a mesquite tree. Lips blue, eyes open, face frozen in terror. No rope, no wound, no mark, just gone. And beside him, a single wildflower, crushed, like someone had held it tight right before the end. The town never rebuilt the gallows, never hired another preacher, just left the tree standing, ropes still dangling, frayed and sun-bleached, as a warning or a welcome. Depends who you ask. Children dare each other to touch it at midnight. Lovers leave wildflowers at its roots. And every year on the anniversary of her hanging, the wind rises at dusk, not to howl, to hum, soft, steady, familiar. And if you stand very still, if you close your eyes, if you've ever loved someone you had to bury, you'll hear it. Her voice, her song, her promise. Every man I love must die, but not alone, not afraid, not forgotten. She makes sure of that, because love in this land is still a death sentence. But now it's also a lullaby. And she's the singer, the keeper, the ghost who walks the edge of the salt flats, waiting, always waiting for the next heart brave enough to break and the next soul worth singing home. The wind still hums at dusk, and if you listen close, you'll hear her whisper, I'm not afraid, and neither should you.